Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're here for the first time. Today I'm going to be talking about TTK versus DPS, and which I think is a better measure in all different situations. Obviously they both have pros and cons, but I think DPS isn't being used as much as it should be, so we're going to go through that. I'll talk about all the reasons for that. As always, if you like the content, please consider dropping a subscription, a like, and a comment to help us out. It helps to support the website and support the YouTube channel. Let's get into it, and we will talk about the differences between TTK and DPS. All right, I've created a hypothetical situation here with 3 different guns and 3 different health situations, and we're going to go through this and try to logic through whether TTK or DPS is more important, or really just give cases for both. So the 3 guns are differentiated by only 1 damage per bullet. So gun 1 does 51 damage, gun 2 does 50 damage, gun 3 does 49 damage. And obviously, if you understand TTKs, you understand why those numbers are going to be important, looking at 100 and 400 health. They all fire the exact same rate at 500 RPM. So if you calculate DPS from that, you're going to see the DPS is very, very similar. I mean, these are almost no different. This is just, just like 2% different. So not a dramatic difference in the actual damage per second the gun's output. But if you look at TTK at 100 health, because gun 1 and gun 2 do 50 damage or 51 damage, it only takes 2 shots to kill someone at 100 health. So TTK at 100 health is 120 milliseconds for both gun 1 and gun 2, whereas for gun 3, even though it's only 1 damage less, the TTK is twice as long because it takes a whole extra bullet to kill that person. So this is why TTKs are really important at low health values. If you're looking at hardcore TTKs or just regular multiplayer TTKs, 100 health is super, super low. So TTKs become very important there because even just a tiny change in DPS can result in a big change in your TTK. So you can see this one is 200% of the TTK of gun 1 and gun 2. So it's dramatically slower. But then if we take those exact same guns and we look at 400 health, so Iron Trials, you're going to see 840 milliseconds for gun 1, 840 milliseconds for gun 2, and 960 milliseconds for gun 3. So yes, there's an extra shot to kill, and it does add that 120 milliseconds, but the percentage of the total time that fight took is much, much smaller. So TTKs become less and less important to look at as you get higher and higher health values, because the percentage of the fight that extra bullet is a much smaller amount. So it's only at 114% of the TTK of gun 1 and gun 2 in these cases. And then if you look at 391 health, this is just a number I picked specifically because of how it worked. That's only 9 health off of full health. They all have exactly the same TTK. And that's not what you would want to see. You don't want to see that they have the same TTK. You want to see that gun 1 outperforms gun 2 and gun 3, because it does by a small amount, but it does. So this is why TTKs can be misleading. They can also be very powerful depending on the situation. I really think DPS, for a lot of reasons, is better and more consistent. Basically, DPS is a more reliable measurement at any given situation. So think if you're in a team fight and someone hits 1 bullet on your enemy, your TTK number is thrown out the window instantly, that you're basing your gun choices off of, because you're going off of exactly 250 health, and you're assuming that you're hitting the exact same spot. Currently, we're going to add the advanced TTK calculator soon. But assuming you're hitting 1 spot at exactly 250 health is just probably a very rare occurrence, especially in trios and quads. And also, like I said, at higher health values, so Iron Trials, at higher health values, it's going to be more consistent to use DPS probably. And that is something that I think the community doesn't really do. I don't think the community uses DPS very often, but I think it's a very, very good measure. And I might actually start using it instead of TTKs in my video, just because think about Iron Trials specifically. If you're fighting someone and you break their plates, health regen takes so long. There's tons of fights where the person's not full health yet. And at that situation, if you're basing everything off your 250 health chest TTK for your gun choice, that's just not going to be accurate almost ever in that situation. DPS just gives you a really good estimation at any given health value. So if they've been shot, if they've been team fired, if they have half a plate, if they have 1 plate, anything, DPS is going to give you an accurate measurement of how the gun's going to perform, the closest we can get to an accurate measurement, whereas TTK is really only good for very, very specific situations. That being said, in solos, it's almost always going to be 1v1, and health regen is really fast in regular solos, so they're almost always going to be at 100, 150, 200, or 250. So playing solos, I think TTKs are great to look at, because you're always going to be fighting someone at those quantized health values, whereas duos, even, you're going to start getting some team fights in there. If you run, just anytime you're running split, TTKs are going to be really, really good, really helpful. But overall, if you want the most generally correct measure of how a gun performs in terms of damage output, I think DPS is a safer measure for most people. So I'm going to start using that in my videos, weighted DPS values with head, neck, chest, stomach, and extremities. But I wanted to explain why I'm going to do that. So one thing to keep in mind about DPS, it's basically impossible to include the open bolt delay of the LMGs or a couple of the SMGs when you're doing DPS, because if you think about what that would mean for the first 50 milliseconds or so, DPS would be 0, and then it's going to ramp up approaching the asymptote of what the actual fire rate and the damage is that would calculate the DPS. So you can't really include open bolt delay in DPS charts, unfortunately. So this is an example here. The AK-47 from Modern Warfare and the Stoner 63 have basically identical TTKs in that first damage range. Very, very close. Stoner wins by a tiny bit. But then if you switch to DPS, because DPS only calculates off the RPM and the damage, the damage per second of the Stoner is going to be dramatically higher than the AK-47, even though they had really similar TTKs. That's just something to keep in mind when you're using the site. It's going to make guns with open bolt delays look like they're better than they are. But again, in a lot of cases, for long range guns especially, open bolt delay doesn't really matter. So it might not even be a bad thing if you're judging a long range gun on DPS, because it doesn't include that open bolt delay. That might not even be a bad thing because it really doesn't matter that much in long range fights. But really, that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I just wanted to explain to you guys the logic I'm using for this and why I'm going to start switching over to DPS more often. I just think it's a more consistent measure across all situations in Warzone. There's so many things you can't account for. You can't possibly go through every single individual health value and memorize the TTKs of a gun and say, oh, well, this gun's going to perform the best in most situations, but because of these certain health values, it might not be as good. That's just way too in-depth. You literally can't do that. So I think DPS is just a really good way to get an average performance of a gun, given a situation and given just the damage values and the RPM. So that's all I wanted to cover. I hope you guys found it interesting and useful. Hopefully it helps you out with your gun builds, and I'll see you all in the next video.